Jennifer Lundy has always impressed me with her work ethic, passion, and commitment to remaining nonpartisan in her new role. She has built important connections that will prove very valuable over the next years. Through her career as a court reporter, Senate staffer, political advisor to numerous legislators, elected officials, and candidates. She has served on numerous government affairs committees, zoning boards, and volunteered as an election judge, member of the Texas Federation of Republican Women. Jennifer is also a passionate community volunteer. She is a bridge builder who will take her task as a nonpartisan leader of a nonprofit seriously. It is my great honor and privilege to introduce our headline speaker, the Executive Director of Texans for Judicial Accountability, Jennifer Lundy.
Thank you. As you said, I'm Jennifer Lundy, and I'm with Texans for Judicial Accountability, and we are advocating for transparency within our judicial system. There is deep-seated corruption all the way up to our Supreme Court, but my focus is Texas. How many of you have interacted with the courts? Just about everyone in the room, of course. Although I worked for the Texas Senate for a number of years, I was a court reporter before that. And I know of the legal system's benefits, challenges, constitutional basis, and the abuse that is also present in that system. Although much of our judiciary is responsive and respectful, there are many that harm the reputation and authority of the judiciary as a whole by their actions. I became aware of some very real, very serious issues with the courts while working for the Texas Senate and House members. I've heard more complaints about the judiciary than would be expected if the cause were merely disgruntled citizens. I've watched many judges in the courtroom as a non-party to the suit, sometimes through work, and sometimes simply exercising my right to observe court proceedings if an interesting case was up. And I've been personally targeted by an unethical judge for doing this. One who called the representative I was working for and attempted to have me fired and damage my career for attending an open hearing, a hearing that was at the request of the representative. This unethical threat by this judge prompted me to begin looking at what can be done about a system where judicial temperament and arrogance is out of control and not serving our citizens well. Quite frankly, at this point in time, it's nothing but a slap on the wrist for a person who can control so much of our lives and, quite frankly, ignore the law themselves. This judge is just one example. He used electric shocks in court as a punishment 3 times after Terry Morris failed to answer his questions properly. Are you aware that the outcome is frequently decided before testimony even occurs? I was not. Most of us do not have to deal with the courts on a day-to-day basis and don't understand that if an unscrupulous judge doesn't like you, doesn't like the attorney you've chosen, you lose. When I started this, I got in contact with several judges before I ever came out with anything, because I wanted to make sure that where I was leading was accurate. One of the judges, I went to his courtroom, and he had me meeting there, and I sat through a hearing, and we went back to his office afterwards, and he let me know that on the way back to the office that the next person that was coming up was going to jail too. I was a little bit flabbergasted at that, because how would he know? So I sat through that hearing as well, and whenever I went back, he had his list ready for me on the things that he thought that I needed to make sure I addressed, and it blew me away. So I've been told it's not fair to say that you're going to lose, but it was by an amazing judge who wouldn't even consider it. The judge that I was there for wouldn't consider it. He was doing what he had been trained to do. But fortunately, I believe most of our judges are doing exactly what we've asked them to do, and that's be a fair steward of the law. Every judge I've spoken to so far is in agreement with what we're trying to do here. So we have a system in Texas where judiciary complaints can be filed with the State Commission on Judicial Conduct, which I'll refer to as SCJC. This is where you send your complaints about a particular judge, any type of judge, from justice of the peace on up. The problem is there are only 12 staff members on this commission. You'll hear why this is a problem in just a few minutes. Even Wikipedia knows. If you go to Judiciary on Texas, they have this. The 13-member State Commission on Judicial Conduct hears complaints about judges and may censure, reprimand, or recommend removal by the Supreme Court. It rarely punishes judges. So we've outlined some of the current problems with the judiciary. There's very little oversight and accountability. There are really no legal remedies, as the local courts will almost never take up any suit against a judge and will simply deflect to the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. And yes, you can appeal your case, but it can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you file a mandamus asking them to look at your judge, they don't even have to look at it. And elections, we need to get them voted out, and it is very hard. The particular judge who targeted me has been a judge for 25 years, and no one will run against him. He is embedded, and this is addressed by the Supreme Court Advisory Committee, which also openly discusses judges accepting payments for rulings. It is no secret, and the Supreme Court's own advisory committee verifies this happens all the time. See YouTube, SCAC, December 4, 2020. It is on your handouts that I gave you too. The State Commission on Judicial Conduct. Every bit of information is on their website. I don't use anything that I don't get from there. If you take the time to look over the annual report of 2022, you'll see that over the last 4 years combined, we've had 6,854 cases. 6,528 of those were dismissed. We have zero information published on dismissed cases. 326 had some sort of reprimand. Although I have only the last 4 years on this slide, I did take time to decipher from the earliest published date until now. There have been 26,885 cases filed since they started filing, and only 212 reprimands. That's 0.78%. And I'd like you to let that soak in. The judge did something wrong, and we see less than 1% of that. As the private reprimand doesn't list anything but the offense. Any agency whose actions are shielded from the public, especially when it is a state position and an elected position, deserves greater scrutiny by the public. You can see on the slide there are 531 private sanctions. Those show the why but not the who. We have zero idea who did what. This is one of the private sanctions. Private warning and order of additional education for a district court judge. The judge failed to comply with the law, failed to maintain professional competence in the law, failed to accord parties and or their counsel the right to be heard according to the law, engaged in improper ex parte communications, and it goes on and on and on, and that was a private reprimand. These should be public. Private sanctions have to stop. We need to hold our judges accountable just as we are held accountable. 5 suspensions in 2022, and out of those 5, 3 were pending and 2 were dismissed. We are committed to making sure unscrupulous judges are held accountable for their actions. This is another district judge, and believe me, there are a ton of them that I can pull up. This one violated 9 separate canons and received a public reprimand in August 2015, and he resigned from the court in March of 2016. So the 12 staff members I mentioned above, I want to be very clear. We're not putting down the State Commission on Judicial Conduct staff. The SCJC is not even large enough to operate as a watchdog agency, as some might think. The staff goes through and investigates complaints, which they take the ones they feel have merit to the commission 4 times a year. The state of New York has approximately the same number of judges and has nearly 50 on its SCJC staff. This needs to change. And believe me, it's not because I'm thinking New York is better than us, because we know Texas is the bomb. But we have 12, they have 49. There's a problem there. The entire judicial system has been allowed to insulate itself through lobbying, creating laws of self-governance, and essentially barricade itself and its actors from ever being held accountable. So we have a mission. We have 6, but they're typed out for you to take, so I'm only going to highlight 2 of them. Educate the public that judges should perform their duties with respect for others, should not engage in behavior that is harassing, abusive, prejudiced, or biased, and should maintain and enforce high standards of conduct and decorum. Advocate for a process and means of investigating, disciplining, and or removing judges who are accused of misconduct. A process is removed from the influence of the judiciary and completely independent to investigate and prosecute rogue judges. The reason we say removed from the influence of the judiciary is that the commissioners of the SCJC determine which cases to prosecute, and the commission consists of a Supreme Court justice, 5 judges, 2 attorneys, and 5 public members. It should have 0 judges. Ways that we can change this. Every single complaint needs to be made public once it has been investigated. We have to be careful here because there are people who put in complaints just because they don't like a judge or simply don't like the ruling. When they all become public and the number of complaints grow exponentially, it could take years to get a public response. This is why we've got to bump up that number from 12. It is not our goal to have false information come out, but it is our goal to have legitimate information be published, as every complainant deserves a response stating the disposition, and we should be able to see the complaints regarding our elected officials. Number 2, every single conviction of every single complaint needs to be published, along with the consequences given. There have been over 500 private reprimands in the last 20 years, everything from failing to obtain credit hours to DUI. And the one I showed you, they're all over the place. These are private and we don't know who they are. Audio and video in every courtroom.
That's right.
Many say we can't afford it. The capabilities are already there. Go to streams.texascourts.gov. The courts are set up for it now. Look at the text cameras and tell me that we can't afford it. Judges should not be allowed to have in-camera hearings, private meetings with lawyers or parties unless there are extenuating circumstances such as a minor child or privileged information. Number 5, we want all judges to be required to draft, validate, and publish their rulings in all matters with a mandatory finding of facts and conclusion of law for every substantive or final decision made during any case. Number 6, judges should be able to endorse candidates for public office if it is for an elected position lower than their own court. This has not been a nonpartisan position for quite some time. Self-governance without oversight and boundaries always fails. It has failed with our judiciary and is simply used to protect a system that is far past the need for reform. The framers of the Constitution wanted a weak judiciary. We do not have a weak judiciary. So, if you look at the slide right now, lawyers beware, criticizing judges can be hazardous to your professional health. We know that there are many attorneys, and I know in the small counties, who will not go up against the judge because the judge is going to rule on their case, and they're going to be quiet. So how do we do all this? We raise our voices loudly. We speak with our legislators, because this affects all of us, whether political or not. We spread it out all over Texas and get the judicial abuse of the office and system to stop. We make it a priority. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be allowed to speak to you today. If you want to help get the word out, please contact me. We're having a lot of people volunteer to help. We need people all over the state. Donations are very much appreciated.